We came about 5 feet below the pavement in contact with a leaden coffin, deposited in the earth but without inscription of any kind. It was not of the shape now in use. It was made of very thick lead and might possibly weigh nearly 200 weight. The coffin was put together in a very substantial manner, the seams being folded over each other and welded. It was probably constructed before the use of solder was known. No bones whatever, either entire or broken, were found within. But there had been preserved an oak shell, which was quite decayed and mouldered into dust when exposed to the air. Making a hole on the top, I thrusted my hand to the head of the coffin to find the skull. Major took it to the vicar, who threw it into the coal hole, from whence the former rescued it and had it enclosed in a glass case. But it was too late. The mischief was done, and its beauty gone forever. I have come to Romsey in Hampshire today, and this magnificent abbey that you can see behind me is Romsey Abbey, and this place holds a very, very special place in my heart. The reason for that is because Romsey is actually where I grew up. I've got many lovely memories of this place, and it's actually one of the very first historical buildings that I ever remember exploring. But there's something in particular in this abbey, in a box, that has fascinated me since I was a child. Now, a few days ago, I posted this picture on my YouTube channel, and I took this picture in such a way that doesn't give away what is inside it. However, I did have a few people try and work it out, and I've had some interesting guesses. A few people said that they had tried to zoom in, and I've had 2 people suggest that perhaps it's the Alfred jewel, the pointer that was found in Somerset. I had somebody else say, oh, a ring or some romantic relic, maybe a chess piece. But what I find really interesting about this is that most people think it's some kind of treasure. Now, I guess it depends on how you define treasure. But if you are expecting gold, you might be a little bit disappointed. However, it is very, very interesting, and it's incredibly rare. So, without further ado, let's go and find out what it is. Making a hole on the top, I thrusted my hand to the head of the coffin to find the skull. I found no bones, but a scalp of female hair as bright as any living lady's hair I have ever seen. Okay, hold up, just 1 second. Some of you are very likely watching this and thinking to yourselves, is that really a full head of human hair that I'm currently looking at? Yes, it is.
Others may be thinking, Jenna, you've brought us to a beautiful old abbey and you've chosen to show us this thing? Well, yes, I have, because I think it's really cool. And let me ask you something. When was the last time you ever saw anything quite like this? Answers in the comments below, because I quite happily make a video about it. And then, of course, some of you, your interest is piqued now. You're looking at this and you're thinking, okay, this is interesting. How old is this? And who did it belong to? And how come the skeleton's gone and we're left with just the hair? How on earth does that even happen? And these are all very valid questions. And they're certainly questions that I pondered as a curious child. But before I attempt to answer those questions, let's go back in time all the way to 907 AD. Romsey is only about 9 miles as the crow flies from Winchester, the ancient capital of Wessex. And to most historians, Winchester also functioned as England's capital during parts of the Anglo-Saxon and early Norman periods. So this place was well connected to the goings-on within the Saxon royal household. And indeed, in 907 AD, King Edward the Elder, the son of none other than Alfred the Great, sent his daughter Alfleda here to Romsey and set her in charge of a small community of nuns. 60 years later, his grandson, Edgar the Peacemaker, refounded the nunnery under the rule of Saint Benedict. Edgar gave more land to the nuns, and over time around this monastic settlement a village grew. However, in 993 AD, Vikings raided the village and completely destroyed the church. But at the turn of the next century, in around 1000 AD, the foundation stones were laid for the very first stone church and nunnery. Having been founded by the royal house of Wessex, it likely served not just as a place of prayer and worship for the monastic community, but also as a centre of learning, a royal family school for noble daughters. We know from historical accounts that at least 3 of Romsey's abbesses were of royal descent. We've already heard of Alfleda, but Christina, granddaughter of Edmund Ironside, and Marie I, daughter of King Stephen, were also both once in charge here at Romsey Abbey. Alongside this, other young royal women were sent here to be tutored both before and after the Norman conquest. At the very eastern end of the south aisle in the abbey can be seen a beautiful 10th century Anglo-Saxon rood cross. It's thought by some that this cross may have been a royal gift to the abbey, and perhaps even by King Edgar the Peaceful when the abbey was refounded in the Benedictine tradition. More evidence of the early stone church can be seen outside on the south transept wall. Another rood cross, this one much larger, also depicts the crucifixion of Jesus, with the hand of God coming down from above. Like the one inside, this too is over 1,000 years old. For over 600 years, a monastic community of nuns made their home here, until in 1539, during the dissolution of the monasteries, the nuns were disbanded and the abbey left vacant. Unlike many abbeys throughout England, Romsey did not suffer the fate of destruction. The townspeople campaigned and were able eventually to purchase Romsey Abbey to use as their parish church. Inside, a very special historical document can still be seen. This is the bill of sale between the people of Romsey and King Henry VIII. They bought Romsey Abbey for £100, and Henry's seal can still be seen attached to this contract. With such a long period of occupation by women, it may well be impossible to ever truly identify who this hair belongs to. And can we be certain that this hair even belonged to a woman? Let's see if we can narrow it down a bit. In 1839, it was gravediggers preparing a grave in the eastern part of the South Isle that discovered the coffin containing the hair. We know already that they recorded that this coffin was made of lead. At the opening to this video, I read out the words of William Jenna, church warden of Romsey Abbey at the time of the discovery. We heard how he described the coffin as having no inscription and of not fitting the design now in use. The coffin was heavy and its seams were folded over each other and welded, but seemingly without solder. I also read out the words of John Major, who, according to his own statement, thrusted his hand to the head of the coffin to find the skull. Well, he goes on to say that the coffin was made of very curious workmanship. The sides was welted together, the top shut on the same as a bandbox. Now, I had no idea what a bandbox was, so I looked it up. This one dates from the early 1800s and it contains a lid that fits snugly with a seam that is reinforced. This one's clearly made of fabric and has been sewn, but in the case of our coffin, this snug fit was achieved by folding the lead together. It is possible that these folds were then heated up to create an even tighter fit, as they would have adhered to each other. We have evidence of lead coffins such as these being used by the Romans. They were reserved for those of great wealth and high status. And the Reverend Edward Burthon, writing in 1899, believed that this coffin did in fact date to the Roman occupation. He also states that it was sold for old lead, so sadly we can't take a look at it now. According to my research, some of these Roman lead coffins have been found with inscriptions, while some have none, and ours was apparently quite plain. However, there really are not that many instances of early lead coffins being found within the UK, that I could find anyway. Even when they were being used, it was only really the very wealthy who had access to them, and those that have been found suggest that they were in use predominantly in ecclesiastical contexts, at least according to archaeologists anyway. So this would fit our coffin. What is perhaps even more interesting is that Edward also mentions that the coffin was found buried lying north to south. This is not a common burial orientation within a Christian context. The vast majority of Christian burials are east to west, and this tradition started to emerge fairly early. However, during the Roman era, apparently it was mixed. And likewise, during the Christianization of England between the late 5th to the 7th century, grave excavations from this period have shown a similar mix as the transition from pagan Britain to Christian Britain was underway. So, considering the abbey context, the style of the coffin, and the orientation of the burial, I don't know about you, but I feel like I've now got more questions. However, fear not, fellow history sleuths, we now live in an age where the superheroes of science can try to narrow it down for us even further. And one such superhero goes by the name of Jamie. Once upon a time in the year 2000, a young boy by the name of Jamie Cameron visited Romsey Abbey on a school trip. The mystery of the hair in the coffin interested him so much that it inspired him to become an archaeologist, specifically in the area of scientific analysis. So it's great to know I wasn't the only child fascinated by the weird hair. Jamie had always wanted to find out more about the hair, and in 2016, he finally got his wish. Now, I'm not a scientist, so for your sake and my sanity, I'm going to keep this simple. However, for those of you who do want to delve into this deeper, I will be placing a whole bunch of links in the description for you, including a link to the official research paper. Jamie and his team wanted to try to answer 3 questions. What time period did the hair date from? What did this person eat on a regular basis? And they also wanted to identify a black substance that is visible on the hair. In order to try to answer these questions, they used AMS radiocarbon dating and stable isotope measurements. According to their findings, the results show that the hair most likely comes from somebody who died between the late 9th century and the early 12th century. If correct, that places this person at the end of the Anglo-Saxon era and possibly into the early Norman era. The results for the wood showed that the tree was cut sometime between the late 9th century and the early 11th century. It's not known for how long the wood could have been laying around for prior to being placed in the coffin, so it's possible it could predate the death of our person. Further tests suggested the presence of marine protein in the diet, which may well be evidence of an ecclesiastical lifestyle. This would perhaps differ from a royal lifestyle, which would likely have contained a lot less fish. The final test was to work out what the black substance on the hair is. Interestingly, despite the fact that it was reported that the hair had been tossed into the coal hole shortly after its discovery, I could find no mention of any coal residue in the paper. There is, however, mention of remnants of the scalp being present. But that right there definitely looks to me like it could be a piece of coal. It's important for me to note at this point that I am assuming that the black substance that they have tested is a separate substance to any coal that is found on the hair. The black substance was identified as being pine resin, which would have been applied either during life or after death, maybe for hair care purposes or as a funerary ritual. So, according to the science, we very likely have here the hair of an individual that died sometime between the late 800s and the early 1100s. I know, that's still quite a significant time frame, and certainly at this point in time, without further testing or the presence of any identifying burial goods or inscription, we're not going to be able to say exactly who this is. And there would have been a good number of women in charge of the abbey over the roughly 230-year period that this hair falls into, not to mention any other ladies that may have either lived here or had close ties with the abbey during that time. And that's assuming the hair belonged to a woman. Personally, I think it's highly likely, given the location, that this hair was that of a female. I did find listed the names of 8 women who ran the nunnery during this period, and there was also a period of roughly 100 years where there is no record at all. There are speculations, of course, from Edward the Elder's daughter Alflade to Saint Ethelfleda, Romsey's very own saint, who was also abbess here, and even the son of Edmund Ironside, Edmund Atheling. But these are just speculations. Whilst we may never know the true identity of the person for whom this hair once flowed, one thing is certain. This place, for whatever reason, was important in some way in their life, and they were important in some way in the lives of others who lived here. Before I bring this video to a close, there is one thing that I am sure many of you are still wondering. How has the hair survived when the bones have completely decayed? Well, I will say it again, I am not a scientist, so I can only tell you what I have found regarding this, and I am more than happy for you guys to share your expertise in the comments. All I ask is that you're kind. But from what I can gather, bones are made largely of calcium phosphate. And in a sealed environment like a lead coffin, body decomposition creates organic acids. With no oxygen, these acidic fluids dissolve the calcium in bones, and this causes the bones to completely break down and vanish over time. Hair, on the other hand, is made of keratin, a very tough protein that is not affected by acid in the same way. In an oxygen-poor sealed coffin, the bacteria that would usually be responsible for breaking down the hair cannot survive. So whilst the bone gradually dissolved in the acidic environment, the hair remained intact. Now, I'm sure it's not always that straightforward, and there must be more to it than that. But whatever the science, the environment within this lead coffin was just right to leave us with a head of long plaited hair and a very interesting mystery.